Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Project Mouse. This episode marks a real milestone as I finally complete the lower hull and tracks. This leaves me with only the upper hull, and then it's onto the stage I'm really looking forward to, painting and weathering. Right, let's get started with the lower hull. I've already superglued the upper return rollers to the suspension beams. Now I have to glue the inner brackets to the hull frames. These will permanently fix the beams in place, eliminating any movement. The outer brackets will be fitted later, as they'll just get in the way at this stage. I've also superglued the inner hubs for the drive sprockets and idlers to the lower hull. The lower hull joins needed some milliput just to seal and tidy things up before I moved on to the next stage, applying texture to the hull. I decided to use the same technique on the lower hull as I'd used for the turret. I mixed up a batch of milliput, and after adding water and breaking it down into a sludge, I applied it to the lower hull with an old brush. I masked off the locating tabs to the upper hull, but in hindsight I should have masked off more areas. This is quite a fun process, but you have to take it slowly and build up the milliput in layers, as it can get pulled off if you're impatient. I found that by the time I'd worked all the way round, the first layer had taken enough to add more. Obviously it's a messy process, and it looks horrendous at times, especially when the milliput goes on in lumps, but don't worry, it'll be fine. And this is what it looks like when the milliput has cured. It all looks pretty disgusting, and as you can see there are plenty of lumps in the milliput, but where it is thin you can get an idea of how the texturing will eventually look. Not taking the time to mask more areas was a mistake, but I should still be able to clean up the detailed areas. Some parts will be a bit fiddly to sort out, but at least I've learned my lesson for next time. After filing back the milliput texturing, you can see the hull is a lot cleaner. I'll only be able to fully judge the effect when it gets into primer. The weld seams were carefully marked out and engraved with the Dremel, using an appropriately sized drill bit. Milliput was later added to these lines to recreate the welds. At this stage I've also cut out the recesses for the lower hull hatches and towing eyes. These parts were 3D printed, with the towing eyes cast in pewter. With the lower hull now detailed, I turned my attention to the tracks. As you will have seen, there are a lot of parts in the tracks, so here are some mouse track facts for you. The tracks were 1100mm or just over 43 inches wide. Each side has 336 individual parts. The heaviest track component weighed 29 kilograms. The total weight of one side of mouse tracks was just under 4 tons. I had previously 3D printed the masters for these, and then cast metal masters using cold cure silicon moulds. From these metal masters, I then made a vulcanized rubber mould to cast the quantity I needed. This mould is for centrifugal casting, and gives high quality castings with minimal cleanup time. To recreate the holes necessary for the track pins, I first laid 1mm stainless steel wire carefully into the mould. The pewter could then be cast around the wire, which can then be removed, leaving holes through the castings. And here are the castings with the stainless steel wire still in place. I couldn't get the molten pewter to flow around the wire at the ends of the track, so holes have to be drilled into the ends of the castings and the wire drifted out. I had to drill and drift out 224 lengths of wire. The smaller track parts were much easier to remove from the wire, just pulling off. With all the tracks cast, it was then on to cleaning up and assembly. The tracks fitted together well and were joined with 0.8mm brass wire in the 1mm holes. This gave the tracks enough articulation without being sloppy. The brass wires were then secured into the tracks with a touch of superglue. It was really satisfying assembling and handling the tracks, and it gave me a lot of encouragement for my next project. The upper run of tracks on the mouse was carried by a set of wheels mounted on the suspension beams, but to give further stability, outer rails were added. I pinned brass box section onto the support brackets to recreate these rails, and they instantly levelled out the tracks. Now, let's see how everything test fits before I break out the primer. It's all gone together very well. I've only test fitted the outer suspension beam brackets and track rail to one side, so you can get a good view of the running gear. It's such a relief that everything fits, and the tracks sit so well. Out of interest, the all-up weight so far is 3.3 kilos, which is about 7 pounds 4 ounces. You can see the tracks make up 2/3 of the width of the tank, which even given the size of the mouse must have made it pretty cosy inside. Now I just have to take it all apart again and hit it with some primer. Before priming, I washed everything thoroughly in hot soapy water to break down any grease and give the primer the best chance to bond. I also masked off the drive sprocket and idler axles. Like the turret, I'm priming the parts with Halford's red oxide primer. A can goes a long way, and it goes on without any fuss. Adhesion is really good, and I didn't get any runs. It's pretty forgiving, despite my impatience and enthusiasm to see how the texturing came out. Let's take a look at the primed lower hull. The texturing worked out really well. It may be a little coarse in some areas, but I think it will ultimately blend in really well, with some weathering and pigments. The contrast in texture between the armour and machine parts is very effective, and the weld detail has come out really well, especially around the towing brackets. The drive sprockets and idlers came out fine. Now I just have to put it all back together again. And here it is ready for paint, the completed lower hull and tracks. The tracks will be blackened and weathered separately, and everything will be dismantled yet again to make painting easier. This is a major stage completed for Project Mouse, leaving just the main hull to construct. Then I'll be on to painting and weathering. I plan to mount the mouse on a diorama base to give this monster a sense of context and scale, then on to my next project. So, make sure you subscribe to my channel to see the next episode of Project Mouse and other Staples and Vine projects. In the next episode, you'll see the upper hull assembled and the mouse start to come together as a complete tank. The upper hull is something I'm really looking forward to, after designing, making and assembling the 880 parts that went into the lower hull and tracks. I hope you found this episode interesting. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel to see more from Staples and Vine. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.